Heavenly Father, thank you so much for a time to spend together as friends and as family. And I thank you for the stories that you tell us. And I pray that your stories become our stories. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I want y'all to turn with me to 2 Kings chapter 17, and it's on page 305. 2 Kings 17, page 305 if you've got a table Bible or cart Bible. And I'm going to tell you about this thing behind me really quickly, and then we'll start reading. So it was the policy of the Mesopotamian empires to displace people. So the land of the Bible is a land between two dynasties, 2,000-year dynasties. And the reason why they lasted so long and were so powerful is because they have water. Water is very scarce in the land of the Bible. Basically, water comes from winter rain, and it soaks down into the limestone, and then it becomes aquifers or wells. So you might have a well dug out in the desert somewhere, and you might have water that you would save in a cistern after it would rain. But other than that, it's dry. So water's always kind of a backstory in the Bible. And so Syria was a water dynasty. Mesopotamia means between the rivers, and because they had water, they had power. And so every once in a while, they would either need a labor force, or they would want to expand their territory, or they'd get into a trade war, or they'd get into something. And so it was the policy of this people, the people in the north. Egypt didn't do this stuff. This is a Mesopotamian thing, is they would displace people. So the whole point about the exile from Judah, 586 BC, August, to be precise, August 586 BC, the people of Judah were taken away for 70 years to Babylon, and then they got to go home when the regime changed, right, under Cyrus the Persian. They held it together. They weren't intended to hold it together. The Babylonians wanted them to disappear into one world Mesopotamian soup, which is exactly what happened to the Philistines. Remember the Philistines of the Old Testament? They disappear in the exile. Well, 100 and some change years before Judah's exile, there was another exile. It really wasn't an exile, it was an obliteration. 722 BC, the kingdom of Israel's gone. So let me recap so that we understand what I'm talking about. And I don't have my timeline with me, but I think you might know it by heart. Our religion is not 2,000 years old, it's 4,000 years old. So 2000 BC is the call of Abraham. 1500 BC is the rescue of the Hebrews from the Egyptians, right? Another water dynasty in the south had them enslaved. 1000 BC is King David, so that's 1,000 years before Jesus. And then 900 BC is the split, and that's the real heartbreak of the Old Testament. And this is where the Old Testament gets a little confusing to read, because you see the word Israel and you see the word Judah. So 900 BC is the beginning of two countries that were formerly one. It's like a civil war. They even make war on each other from time to time, but they're competitors and they don't like each other. Israel in the north, 10 tribes. Judah in the south, 2 tribes. So in the year 722 BC, Assyria attacks the north and wipes them off the map, never to be seen again. Now, there's a little bit of debate about this at the time of Jesus, because the Samaritans who live in this place, which would be the northern, I'm going to show you a map in just a second, the northern part of the country, said, no. We are the nation of Israel. We're still here. We never went anywhere. We worship like you. We're kin to you. We're Jews like you. And the people of Jesus' day said, no, you're not. You're not the same. You're displaced people. So that was the big debate. And because there ain't no fight like a family fight. And so that was the big fight in the first century in Jesus' world. To the point that pilgrims, so in the time of Christ, pilgrims would walk from the Galilee to Nazareth, from Galilee to Jerusalem, which is the same distance as Birmingham to Montgomery. And it'd take them 5 days to do it. But he would walk a pilgrim route down a really, really hot, dusty road that many of you have traveled with me before, which is along the banks of the Jordan River, which is the lowest place on planet Earth. It's the Great Rift Valley. I mean, talk about no water. If you stray from the water source of the Jordan, you'll die. It's really bad lands. And Jesus did that because they avoided walking in the Samaritan lands. They didn't like the Samaritans to the point that they would avoid it and walk a dangerous road to go to Jerusalem. Now, what you have behind you is, or what I have behind me rather, is a relief found in southwestern Turkey a few years ago, a place called Basbuk. And what you're seeing are Assyrian gods with Aramean faces. which sort of proves what the Bible is, you're about to read in the Bible, which is that the Assyrians like to gobble up nations and people and put them all together and kind of create one religion with these displaced people. So what this does, this picture was actually in the Jerusalem Times. They're really excited about it. It confirms what I'm about to read to you in 2 Kings chapter 17. So for those of you who just arrived, we're going to look at page 305, 2 Kings 17, verse 24 through 28. This is the origin of the Samaritans. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, Sepharvaim, if I'm saying it right, and placed them in the cities of Samaria. So that's the west bank of the Jordan River. Okay, that's Samaria, what we call the west bank now. In place of the people of Israel, they took possession of Samaria and settled in its cities. And when they first settled there, they did not worship the Lord. Therefore, the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations that you've carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land. Therefore, he has sent lions among them. They're killing them because they do not know the law of the God of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from here. Let him go and live there and teach them the law of the God of the land. So one of the priests whom they'd carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel, and he taught them how they should worship the Lord. So a couple things going on here. I don't know about the lions thing. I just, when I hear that, I'm thinking I hate when that happens. But notice that there was a little g God. The king of Assyria said, okay, bad things are happening because they don't know the God of the land. So the Assyrians live in a polytheistic world where they believed that each land had its own little god. And actually, until after the exile, so did the Hebrews. So the Hebrews would interpret the first of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Meant that, okay, there are a lot of gods out there. We got to stay with our team. And that was exactly what the Babylonians wanted to do when they destroyed the temple and took them away. If you could destroy their God, you would destroy their psyche, their hope, right? You destroy their religion, you destroy their people. And then what happens when they're living way out in Babylon, God calls a prophet, Ezekiel, way out there. And it's like, they're going, whoa, we misinterpreted this. The first commandment means thou shalt not have any gods before me, because there are no other gods, right? God is only God. And so they left home as monolatrists and they came back as monotheists. So you can kind of see this attitude of the king of Assyria. So he's very practical about it. He's going, okay, this isn't working. We've displaced all these people. This isn't working. Send one of their priests to teach them how to be Jews. This is what's going on, and this is the origin story of the Samaritan people. Now what I want to do is turn to page 368, which is Ezra chapter 4. Ezra and Nehemiah are stories about what happened when God's people, Ezra chapter 4, page 368. Ezra and Nehemiah are about what happens when God's people finally go home and they rebuild. I like to, when I read Ezra and Nehemiah, I like to think about the background of, hammering and sawing, and just it's like rebuilding after a storm. They come home and everything had been destroyed, so this is a rebuilding time. And in Ezra chapter 4, which is on page 368, they decide to rebuild the temple. When the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the families and said to them, let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do, and we've been sacrificing to him ever since the days of King Esarhaddon of Assyria, who brought us here. Okay, these are the Samaritans who want to join now in building the temple in Jerusalem alongside the returned Hebrews. But Zerubbabel, Yeshua, and the rest of the families of Israel said to them, you shall have no part with building a house to our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus of Persia has commanded us. So King Cyrus of Persia enabled them to go home. He had a different plan than the Babylonians. When King Cyrus of Persia becomes the world leader, he wants people to go home, be happy, and pay me. So that's how they get to go back, and so that's what's referred to there. So they go home and they're rebuilding, and the Samaritans show up and they say, hey, let us build with you because we worship God just like you do. And Ezra says no. And this sets up, I would say, 300 years, 3 centuries of bad Samaritan relations, Hebrew relations, really bad Samaritan-Hebrew relations, because they send them away. Okay, now I want us to have a thought experiment, right, and just ask a rhetorical question. Why? I have a minister friend who really has a hard time with this story because would the word be xenophobic? Is that a good word for this? I mean, it's just like nobody but our team. This is Judah first, kind of stuff. And why wouldn't they build relations with their neighbors? Why wouldn't they let it happen? Well, let me tell you the story of what happens next, and maybe we can answer that question. There's a good answer for it. So the Samaritan lands are also what we call the West Bank of the Jordan River. And so this red line is the line of demarcation between what was Israel and then what was Judah. And Judah was really just only little. It was just two tribes down here in the bottom, but they had Jerusalem right on the line. Jerusalem is right there. So they had a capital city, which Israel never had one. But basically, the capital was wherever the king happened to have a palace, which means that it was less stable, and it was probably more ripe for a fall when Assyria took it over in 722 BC. But this is the land. So this is the land that gets resettled. This also is the land where Jesus does most of his ministry. When the exiles returned to Judah after 70 years in Babylon, they begin to repopulate all this. Except the Samaritans are in their way, and the Samaritans are all right here in Samaria, which is the West Bank. That's the Jordan River there. That's the Sea of Galilee. That's the West Bank, and it stops at the Jezreel Valley, which is this big breadbasket valley right here. So what the Samaritans do after they're rebuffed in building the temple, they build their own temple, and they build it right up here in the heart of the West Bank on a mount called Mount Gerizim. So now I've got you coached up a little bit. They build a temple. In other words, they build a copy paste. They go, fine, you're not going to let us build a temple? We'll build our own temple. And why is it important? Because it's still there. We don't have the temple in Jerusalem. Now, by the way, I can't take you. This is in the middle of the hottest part of the war right now. I mean, you can't go there right now, which is sad. But maybe one day when and if that part of the world's ever right, I can show it to you. We don't have a temple in Jerusalem because it was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. Remember that? All we have is the Temple Mount, and it has the Dome of the Rock on it, and now Oscar Mosque. So it's a Muslim, this is the third holiest site in Islam. Can't go up there, but we do have a copy-paste of it on Mount Gerizim. So that's one reason why it's important. The Samaritans said, fine, we'll build one. So what you have here is a Iron Age temple. We just now it's curious. They can't worship directly on it. They still worship there. They can't worship directly on it because late Romans, people that we call Byzantines, built a church on it and defiled it. And so it too has been defiled, although you can climb all over it. So they do their sacrifices around the base of it, around the base of the wall. And they still worship there. And they worship in a way Samaritans are for us. If you want to say it look at it scientifically, for us they're fascinating because they're first century people still worshiping the way that Jesus would have seen and known. So you can see it, right? Edon actually worked there on an archaeological dig, and he said, you don't want to be around when it's sacrifice time. He said, it's pretty gross. And you can imagine some squalling, the lamb or something. I mean, it's terrible. But they still do it, and they still kind of keep many of the ways. So that is the priest. This is an idea of the height. So the temple looks down it's on top of a pretty high mountain, and that's actually the town of Nablus, which is a Palestinian town, and it's run by the Palestinian Authority. And again, it's just real tricky to get in and out of there, and the settler stuff going on, and bullets fly, and it just isn't a great place to visit right now, but it's still there. And then, yes. Oh, have I been there? Hello, I was talking to the brother of the high priest of all the Samaritans. There are 800 of them. They live on Mount Gerizim. They make really good tahini. And they marry their own. They marry their own people. I think every once in a while they'll bring in a foreigner, which they need to, because if you look at the brother of the high priest of all the Samaritans, check out how long his ears are. You can see their little kids running. The ears are just flapping in the wind. So it's unfortunate when there are only 800 of you and you just marry each other for centuries, right? That things happen. And he told me so many times. He was kind of a strange guy. He told me so many times that his brother, if anything happens to his brother, he'll become the high priest, which made me thinking, your brother ought to watch his back. I'm just saying, right? So yes, this was my day with the Samaritans. So why didn't they get to help? It seemed like he was a nice fella. While he was telling me Samaritan stories, his teenage daughter was sleeping on a sofa and just kind of snoring over the side, which kind of I know that world. My children always sleep on me. So he had his little hobbies, and he told me some odd things. And then I'm gonna answer the question why not? Why didn't they let them build? So to recap, scientifically, it's important because they're first century people worshiping in a first century way. So we can study them and get a good feeling for what it must have felt like for Jesus in Jerusalem. That's the first thing. Second thing, they only read the Torah. They only read the first 5 books of the Bible. Now, the reason why they only read the Torah is because Ezra, of the book that we just read, Ezra actually collated the rest of the Old Testament from exile. And of course, if Ezra is the one that told them that they couldn't rebuild, they're not going to read anything written by Ezra. So they only read the first 5. So that's all that they have. And then the priest started telling me some kind of nutty things. He said, and this is where I started thinking about Samaritans and what the word heresy might mean. When I was in seminary, I was taught that a heresy is a truth that's just a little wrong. Like it's got a lot of truth in it, but just a little edge of it is just a little wrong. So, for instance, a Christian heresy might be that Jesus was Superman, that the nails didn't hurt, right? That's that actually was one of the ancient heresies that Jesus just wore like a human suit, but really he was divine and he could do Superman kind of things. Well, then what does the sacrifice mean if the nails didn't hurt? I mean, that you see, that's of course Jesus is God and he's also human, but he has to be both for it to be right. And a heresy would push the other truth just a little too far. That's what a heresy means. So the priest of the Samaritans said, well, you know that they spoke Samaritan in the Garden of Eden. I thought, well, that's a little weird. That's a weird story. And also as a Western thinking scientist, I think that's a poem. I don't think there's really a Garden of Eden there. And so he kind of went on and on and on. He said something about the bones of Joseph, and I'm kind of listening. Then finally he said, our 10 Commandments are a little different. Our 10 Commandments are a little different. Now I want to remind you what the 10 Commandments are, and then I'll show you why perhaps the Samaritans couldn't build with the Hebrews, and why Ezra knew that they couldn't build with the Hebrews. Remember, they're not Jewish. They're from somewhere else, Babylon or something, and they've been established there, and they were taught the Hebrew religion. But as such, they distorted it a little bit and made it into a heresy. So the 10 Commandments are basically, I want to give you a new orientation towards the 10 Commandments and why they're important. I don't like what our politicians do, and they just hang it on the wall, and they think that's going to be an amulet or something. That really devalues what the 10 Commandments really are. 10 Commandments are better than what we do with them. So 1500 BC, if we think about our timeline, God's people were rescued from slavery in Egypt. And they've been in Egypt for 400 years. So they got the Egyptians all up in their hair. They just, it's like a toxic relationship where you can't see anything right. And so they're thinking like Egyptians. So what God has to do is God has got to get them out in the wilderness where they could think and they could listen. They have to trust. I was telling the guys last week in Bible study in Numbers chapter 11, Moses is so put out with them because they're just whining all the time. They whine. They miss Egypt. Because they had good food in Egypt. Well, a good restaurant's one thing, but how about slavery? And so they're free, but they're just eating that quail all the time and manna, and they're just whining about it. And finally Moses says, and this is a paraphrase, but it's pretty close. He looks at the sky and he says, God, kill me now. Just kill me. I'm tired of them. They're wearing me out. Just kill me. And I was thinking that'd be a great plaque to put on any minister's desk. Just kill me now. So God takes them to a mountain as opposed to a pyramid. Now, I want you to think of the 10 Commandments as an alternate view of the universe and us in it. So he takes them to a mountain that God made, not a pyramid that man made. And then using a technology, which is a new technology that the Egyptians had perfected, which is writing. I haven't been to Egypt, but I watch a bunch of Nat Geo shows on Egypt. I've seen it, and I'm going to go one day. And I've seen a lot of Egypt things at the museum in Chicago where somebody stole a bunch of Egyptian stuff. They stole like a whole pyramid in the 1900s. It was great, and I'm sure Egypt would love to have it back. But anyway, the Field Museum. So what the Egyptians did is they perfected the art of writing to tell the stories of their kings. Right? Hieroglyphics basically tell the stories of their kings, and they tell the story that the king is divine, and they tell the story that only the king lives forever. You know, the Egyptians will tell you everything you need to know about the afterlife, but you need to remember that if you're going to date it to the time of Moses, only the king gets to live forever. Now, we're resurrection people, right? We keep going as us. And so to get us to that point, Moses and God, they've got to get the Egyptian out of their hair. So the other thing the Egyptians believed was that the hieroglyphics would come to life at some point. They would have a trust or a pot of money that would bring food to the dead mummy king for a time. But when that money ran out, the hieroglyphics would simply come to life and would feed them in the afterlife. But listen, if you're not a king, this story's not for you, right? That's another. My friend Don says the reason why the Jews don't talk about the afterlife very much is because the Egyptians talked about it all the time, right? So again, one of the ways you could describe the Ten Commandments is don't be Egyptian. Now I'm hanging with this because I want you to rethink the Ten Commandments for a second. So 1500 BC, God takes God's own finger and writes this new technology and writes what He wants from us as human beings. The first four are right relationship with God. I'll see if I can remember this. No gods before me. No graven image. Remember I told you about the hieroglyphics that come to life, right? Don't take the Lord's name in vain. No incantations. The Egyptians believed that you could force God to do something, a God to do something for you if you said the right words. And then my favorite is the fourth. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Not because you're not supposed to go to movies on Sunday. It's because the Sabbath is equal. Slaves rest and kings rest and God rest with them. It's equal. In other words, they're to be a different people. They're not supposed to have a hierarchy. Matter of fact, they weren't even supposed to have kings. That broke God's heart. But the Ten Commandments are a new way of being human. So the first four are union with God, and then the last six are union with each other. And I would say that if I could summarize the last six, I would simply say this. The last six are don't live by your appetites, and people are not things. That's it. Don't use people and don't live by your appetites. And so now what God did and I also want you to notice, if you ever want to look up the Ten Commandments, which is Exodus 22, there's no special Ten Commandments page in the Bible. You would think that there would be like something with a lot of margin with the 10, you know. Instead, it's just embedded in a bunch of story. There's a bunch of story before and a bunch of story after. And the reason why they did it that way is because the Hebrews wanted to make a key point. And that is the law is written in our everyday. It's written in our hearts, and it's written every day. It's not on a monument somewhere. It's not something that's supposed to hang on the wall. It's supposed to be internalized to the point that we are the living, walking Ten Commandments. I mean, this is union, and it's what it always was: union with God, union with each other. And the last of the 10, land the plain rich, is this one: "Thou shalt not covet." Okay. Which means want what you have and you'll have what you want, right? And live at peace with each other. Don't live by your appetites. Thou shalt not covet. Except the Samaritan Ten Commandments are different. The 10th commandment is, thou shalt build a temple on Mount Gerizim. That's different, right? That completely messes up the whole thing. That's a heresy. The point was union with God, union with each other, not thou shalt build a temple on Mount Gerizim. I mean, so for that reason, Hebrews avoided Samaritans as much as they could because a heresy is a truth pushed too far. Now, I've got you all coached up on Samaritans, but now I want to show you two scenes from the Gospels that throw everything I've just said kind of on its head. And we're going to start with John chapter 4, which is page 864. John 4, page 864. See, I've got you, what I'm doing with you guys, I've got your mind all filled with all this information. And now these stories are going to come to life for you in a different way. So I'm going to read a few verses of this. John chapter 4, page 864. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself but the disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. See, he's going back to Galilee that way. So he's going through Samaria. You know what that means now. So he came to the Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob was given to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans." You get it now? You see how this works? Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." There were 3 festivals in Jerusalem that you were required to attend one. If you could swing 3, it'd be great, but you had to go to one. And you had 3 opportunities to do it. So basically, if you lived in the Galilee like Jesus did, and you're poor as church mice, you go to the synagogue every Sabbath, and that's where you learn about God. That's kind of like Sunday school. But 3 times a year, you would travel to Jerusalem to worship God. So worship would happen in Jerusalem. And so the third one, called Sukkot, was all about praying for winter rain so that your crops would grow. Do you remember how we started this thing? Water is a backstory all the time. And Sukkot's all about water. And so on the last day of the festival, the high priest would draw water from the pool of Siloam, which is down at the bottom of the hill. And he'd climb about 300 feet of a grade. It's a steep hike even today, to the Temple Mount, and he would pour water over the altar and pray for winter rains. And he called it living water. So Jesus is offering her living water in Samaria. Hello, that's really, really shocking to the first century listener. So let's keep going with verse 11. The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where did you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it?" And Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become them a spring of water, gushing to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may be never thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come back." And the woman answered him, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You're right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you've had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband." "What you said is true," the woman said to him. "Sir, I see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshiped on this mountain," Gerizim, okay? "But you say the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for such the Father seeks those to worship him." What you got here is Jesus saying that living water is busting out all over the place, even in Samaria, right? So now God is not sort of bound to Jerusalem, if you will, but rather God is free, and even free to bless the Samaritan woman who is living in sin and has no friends because she has to draw water in the heat of the day. So she's an outcast person, not only by her race, but by her behavior, and yet we learn that no one is beyond the grace of God. It's like the 10 Commandments are coming true all over again in a new way and in a new place. Okay, that's the first sort of snapshot. The second one is Luke chapter 10. It's page 844. So 844. He makes a decision. Jesus makes a decision in Luke chapter 9, and at page 844. He makes a decision in Luke chapter 9 to go to Jerusalem for the last time to die. And Luke's gospel, if it were written like a screenplay, basically everything from Luke 9 forward is this long journey to the cross. And he also chooses to go through Samaritan lands. So he goes through this, and they're hostile to him. And he kind of goes this last way, the dangerous way, if you will. And the very, very first story that Jesus tells after making a decision now to go to Jerusalem to die and to enact the plan for us is this story here. It's Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." By the way, he just summarized the 10 Commandments. You get how that works now? They all knew this. He said to him, "You've given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Meaning, who do I have to love and who do I don't have to love? Which would be a heresy. Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, who fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. By chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed on by the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the other place and saw him, passed on by the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. And he went to him and bandaged his wounds, and having poured oil and wine on them, then he put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back I will repay you whatever more you will spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And he said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." So the very first story, I'm going to see if I can say this one more time. The very first story that Jesus tells after he decides to go to the cross and die for us is the story of the Good Samaritan. And those are 2 words that they would never put those 2 words together. They would never string those along, right? Good Samaritan, the good enemy, the good alien, the good no. In other words, what you see in the story of the Good Samaritan is an absolute earth-shaking way of being human. Who is my neighbor? The one who does justice and mercy. Bible Club, we have a little song we sing about Micah 6:8, and I'm just trying to drill it into their heads. Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. To act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. That's it. If we can get that right, God will take care of everything else. Everything else will fall into place. It was never that hard. And so what he does is he takes the story of a Samaritan, which would be the most shocking of all, and he turns their religion on their heads. Okay, that's why Samaritan's important in the Bible. I'm going to turn this off, see if y'all have any questions.